On Wednesday, June 14th, 2023, my father leaned across a linened table on the shore of Lake Union and smirked the way men do when they think they hold the map and the compass to your whole life. "You never could manage money, Caitlin. Lucky for you, we already did." It sounded like a joke with sharp edges, the kind you laugh at to be polite. By Saturday, June 17th, I would learn that the joke was a confession and the laughter was a lock picking my future. I am Caitlin, 27 years old, a user experience designer in Seattle, Washington, and the night he said it was my birthday dinner, the kind with wine pairings, and the kind of desserts that are more art than food. If family greed has ever blindsided you, I know the feeling, and I will ask a question of you later. For now, understand this. In 3 days, I would discover a waterfront corner apartment I did not know I owned and see $8.3 million boiled down to barely $300,000. But I will tell you exactly how that truth surfaced soon, because the timing matters and the words matter more. I live in a modest, slightly creaky one-bedroom in Capitol Hill, the kind of place with scuffed baseboards and a view that is better at sunrise than any other hour. By day, I draft wireframes and argue with error messages. By night, I prototype ideas and send portfolios into the void. My grandfather Walter taught me to treat promises like contracts, and contracts like living things that need watching. He is a real estate legend in the Pacific Northwest, the sort of quiet power that settles a room just by stepping into it. And when I was small, he would slide bank statements across the table as if they were storybooks. "Read what the numbers are saying," he would tell me, "not what you want them to say." I learned restraint from him, the art of not spending and not speaking too quickly, the art of setting boundaries you can actually keep. That is the part of me my parents never understood or maybe would not allow. The dinner was meant to be simple. Lake light on glassware, a full moon punching a road through the water, and the soft clink of silver where strangers celebrated things that did not hurt. My mother Diane arrived dressed like every camera already loved her. My father Harold wore triumph like a new suit. Walter came with his assistant Jennifer, who carried a tidy folder, and his lawyer Stanley, who carries an even tidier voice. I should have paid attention to the folder, the lawyer, the skittish way the host kept checking our table as if he knew more about us than we knew about ourselves. I should have asked for a different night, a different room, a different life. Looking back, this is the point where the movie of my memory slows down, where every detail is high definition, the napkin folded like a sail. The way my mother's smile was a little too white, the feel of my phone buzzing in my bag with a message from Olivia, my downstairs neighbor, and the kind of friend who knows when to buy the good cake and when to say nothing. We ordered a tasting menu that paraded onto the table in careful portions, and I tried to act unfazed by the complicated names of things I could not pronounce. Then Walter, who rarely asks questions he does not already know the answers to, turned to me and asked if my apartment was comfortable. I heard the word apartment bounce around the glassware, and for a second I could not make it land. Which apartment, I said, because there is the apartment I rent, and there is only that. My father chuckled. My mother dabbed at the corner of her mouth as if I had said something vulgar, and Jennifer's eyes dropped to the folder as if something inside it had just woken up. If this were any other story, someone would have shouted. In my story, no one raised their voice. We set our voices down in velvet and let the damage find its own volume. It is important for what comes later that you understand the way denial walks in wearing logic's clothes. I told myself this was a joke, a late surprise like people do with cars and big bows in commercials. I told myself maybe my grandfather had decided to make a grand gesture now that I had clawed my way into a career that sounded real to people. I told myself to breathe, to eat, to be grateful. But gratitude is not a leash, and the tightness in my chest was not confusion. It was the first crisp edge of a truth refusing to be smoothed down. In less than an hour, the word trust would stop, meaning love, and start meaning litigation. I will tell you the exact sentence my father used that night, the one that will sting long after the checks clear, but not yet. It matters that you feel the temperature drop first. Walter reached over, covered my hand with his, and said my name in a way that felt like closing a door gently so it would not slam. "You are safe," he said. "Just listen." He turned to Stanley, who set the folder on the linen like a judge lays down a gavel, and for a moment I wanted to beg them all to let me finish my dessert first, to let me be 27 for one more hour without heavy words. I did not beg. I sat still. This is how quiet revenge begins, though I did not know the phrase yet, with the decision not to perform rage for people who treat your pain like theater. I would not scream. I would not break anything. I would learn, I would document, and when it was time to act, I would act in ways that leave no fingerprints, except the kind spelled out in patient ink. Before Stanley opened the folder, the room did a strange thing. It went sharper. The hum of other conversations separated into threads I could name. The lake outside went from glitter to glass. My mother's posture clicked into a rehearsed angle. My father nodded to himself content, as if the world had finally lined up in the order he had ordained for it. He had no idea that the next days would pull at every thread he thought was tight. He had no idea that I had learned patience from a man who buys buildings one lot at a time and never once mistakes speed for power. My father believed control was loud. Walter taught me that real control is quiet, and I was about to learn just how quiet I could be. The question landed as softly as a napkin. "Is your apartment comfortable?" Walter asked it the way he asks about weather fronts, as if watching for a shift I could not see. For a heartbeat, I thought he meant my rented one-bedroom in Capitol Hill, the creaky place with morning light that forgives everything else. Then a second meaning pressed in heavy and uninvited, and I heard myself ask, "Which apartment?" The table went still in the way rooms do when truth has entered wearing a different name. My father's chuckle was small and smug, a private joke he performed in public. My mother touched the stem of her glass and smiled with the kind of politeness that behaves like a blade. Jennifer looked down at the folder balanced on her lap, and Stanley's expression rearranged itself into the neutral patience of someone who has measured outcomes before dessert. Denial is a brilliant costume designer. In the space of a breath, it dressed reality in silk. Perhaps this was a thoughtful surprise they had sat on for years, a timed key to adulthood, a rite of passage I had somehow missed. Maybe Walter, who has always believed in work first and present second, had decided a late gift would land better now that my career was not a scribble on a napkin, but an actual title with health insurance and a desk I did not assemble myself. I tried on those friendly explanations and found they did not fit. They were too tight in the chest and too loose where the spine should be. Under them, something colder waited, tapping a single fingernail on the table. If there was a second apartment, why did I not know? And if there was a second apartment, why did my parents look like they had already taken a victory lap around it? Memory has a way of editing itself as soon as you put it under bright light. Sitting there, I caught flashes that had once felt like static and now sharpened into signals. The summer after college, there was a backyard cookout at my parents' house where my mother staged the condiments like a magazine spread 5 kinds of mustard, 3 kinds of pickles, none of them opened. Harold joked that he had a portfolio of sauces, and everyone laughed, but the laughter had a brittle edge I recognize now. That same weekend when I mentioned I was considering moving closer to downtown, he said, "Capitol Hill is fine. No need to get fancy." It sounded like fatherly caution. Now it sounds like someone managing inventory. There were other small notes in the margin that felt at the time like nothing. Around my 25th birthday, my parents insisted on booking a celebratory dinner for me, then canceled at the last minute because of a conflict with financial advisors. I spent that night on my balcony with takeout noodles, telling myself that adulthood was the art of not making everything a story about abandonment. A week later, my father sent me a message telling me to be smart with your credit, which felt oddly timed because I had been smart with my credit, and he had never asked to see a single bill. He never asked me anything practical at all. He preferred speeches to questions, declarations to details. Looking back now, I can see the outline of a map he did not want me to read, he just wanted me to follow it. Walter noticed the way my shoulders squared. He reached for his water and let silence do the work my parents could never do, which is to leave a feeling alone long enough for it to tell the truth. Comfort is a kind of safety, he said to no one in particular, and safety is not a luxury. Jennifer, quick and exacting, offered a reassuring half-smile that told me the folder was not a weapon, but a tool. Stanley dabbed his mouth with a napkin as if to signal we would finish the meal with dignity. Then we would open the folder when words could stand in their own light. My parents, misreading the entire choreography, kept performing Wealth on a stage that had already gone dark. Diane complimented the sommelier with a tone that sounded like flirting with her reflection. Harold told a story about a business partner in Florida, as if Florida were simply a sun-drenched idea and not a future exhibit in a case file. I tried to eat and discovered I could not taste anything. The food arrived in sculpted compositions that should have made me feel lucky. And perhaps I did feel lucky, but not in a way anyone at that table would recognize. Lucky to be the granddaughter of a man who does not panic. Lucky to have learned that you can let silence be heavy without throwing it at anyone. Lucky to have Olivia, who sent another text a photo of the chocolate cake she had iced in my tiny kitchen with the message, "Don't let them steal your joy, babe," and to feel my phone hum at my hip like a little heartbeat, reminding me of a world that did not require me to perform gratitude for people who had not earned it. My mother tried a new tactic, the one where concern is a costume for control. "Sweetheart, you know you have always been sensitive about money," she said, stretching the word sensitive until it became a diagnosis. "That is why family steps in." She said family the way some people say charity. Harold smiled as if the sentence had hit all the marks he had approved in rehearsal. I asked a simple question. If you have stepped in, why am I the last to know where I am standing? The smile slipped only for a second, but I saw it. You would have seen it too. It is the expression people wear when a secret believes it will live forever, and then realizes it is mortal. The waiter appeared with a course that smelled like cedar and citrus, and for a while we let the choreography of service reset the room. I counted my breaths the way my therapist taught me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Name 5 things you can see. I could see the lake combed flat by wind, Jennifer's steady hands, Stanley aligning his fork with mathematical care, my mother adjusting her bracelet with the outrage of a queen, denied tribute my father in love with his reflection in the window. I promised myself one thing, not to give them a scene they could tell for years as evidence that I was unstable. I would give them nothing they could weaponize. I would give them only the truth, and the truth does not need volume. When Walter finally spoke again, he did not address my parents at all. He asked me if I felt safe to keep listening. The oddest sensation washed over me. Then not relief exactly, but a recognition like finding a light switch where you always suspected one might be. I nodded. He said that after we finished here, we would take a short walk outside, breathe the night air, and then look at a few documents with calm eyes. To my parents, it probably sounded like a prelude to flattery. To me, it sounded like the end of a long improvisation and the beginning of the score. I did not yet know about the house in Florida, or the boat, or the letters from a homeowners association with more rules than a monastery. I did not yet know about rental receipts on an apartment I had never seen, or the date stamps that would later march in a straight line toward a plan to vanish. I knew only this: the question which apartment had put a crack in the room, and through that crack, a colder, clearer air was coming in. There is a sentence my father said that night which I will repeat to you soon because it is the truest map of his mind I have ever heard. But stories need breath between beats, and the breath between this beat and the next is where everything changed. The folder had not been opened yet. The wine had not been finished. And still the shape of the evening had shifted from celebration to audit, from performance to proof. If you have ever felt the ground slide an inch under your chair while everyone else kept smiling, you already know the sensation. You already know how a life can hinge on a single softly asked question. Stanley set the folder on the table as if it had a pulse, then opened it to a cover letter dated the week of my 25th birthday. The first page was not dramatic. It was neat and almost kind a memorandum confirming what had been created the day I was born, a family trust with my parents named as the initial stewards, with full transfer of control to me at age 25. There were instructions written in plain English that felt like a handrail in a dark stairwell, annual statements to the beneficiary, no withdrawals without beneficiary consent. Once the beneficiary reached adulthood, an apartment to be conveyed as a gift at 25, with keys and codes delivered directly to me. Jennifer's tabs divided the years into quiet chapters. She slid the first batch toward me and said softly, "We will go page by page." Walter nodded as if we were just balancing a checkbook after dinner. My parents smiled, the fixed smiles of people who believe documents can be talked to death. The second set of pages was where the air turned cold. Quarterly statements with clean columns tracked a slow climb from a few million to about $8.3 million by the time I was 25. Then a jagged slope began. The entries were labeled as family support and strategic disbursements spiking for travel jewelry and something labeled property improvements in a county in Florida that none of us vacationed in. 7 years of withdrawals, each one tidy, each one defended in the notes, as if a narrative had been rehearsed. I watched numbers become rooms, and rooms become a house on water with a dock and a modest boat, the kind that photographs well at sunset, and sinks a little on paper when you count the carrying costs. There were property tax records and letters from a homeowners association written in cheerful fonts about compliance and community standards. Jennifer showed me the line where rental income from a corner unit in Belltown had been deposited a unit that had my name on the title and my parents' names on the outgoing transfers. I felt my throat tighten, not from anger exactly, but from the weight of all the months I had spent making rent on a creaky one-bedroom, while a place that belonged to me was treated like a revenue stream. I asked the smallest possible question. When was I supposed to be told? Stanley pointed to a letter in the folder sent on my 25th birthday, certified, and signed for at my parents' address. A copy addressed to me sat in the file, its envelope still sealed. My mother did not flinch. "You were busy," she said, as if busyness were a legal category. "We spared you the stress." My father leaned back as if the chair had proven his point. "Adult life requires oversight," he said, rolling the word oversight on his tongue like a candy he meant to keep. "You have always been creative. We handled the structure." He spoke in a tone that turned care into control and control into possession. If there is a sentence that describes our dynamic, it is this: their kindness often arrived with a receipt I could not see yet. Jennifer turned to a thinner section labeled Keys and Codes. Concierge logs from the Belltown building listed fob registrations, guest passes, maintenance requests. None of them were mine. The logs read like a diary kept by a stranger living a parallel life, receiving packages, arranging cleanings, accepting a set of tenants who signed leases I had never seen. There were copies of the leases too, with the rent checks routed through a management company my father controlled. He said it like a favor. It would have been wasted empty, he offered a man explaining weather to someone standing in the rain. We kept it pristine, and the income helped cover other needs. He did not say whose needs. He did not need to. The paper said it for him. There was an addendum for the house in Florida. Closing disclosures inspection notes, praising a dock rebuilt to withstand storms, and a registration for a small boat acquired 6 months later. The photographs were tasteful and impersonal: white sofas, blue water, a place you see on a vacation rental site, and forget after you close your browser. I could not reconcile those images with the spreadsheet lines where money left and never returned. I do not hate beauty. I hate theft dressed up as taste. Walter watched me, not my parents, and asked if I would like water. I realized my hands were steady. I realized that steadiness was going to be my only weapon that night. Stanley summarized the situation without adjectives. The trust had clear rules. The rules had been bent, then broken. The duty to inform had been ignored. The apartment had been diverted. The funds had been used in ways that did not match the purpose of the trust. He paused and let the room breathe. It felt like standing in a doorway between the life I thought I was living and the life I would have to live now that the lights were on. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand, an old choreography designed to reframe any concern as overreaction. "Sweetheart families share," she said as if the law were a dinner table. "We kept everything in motion. You will understand when you have children." I pulled my hand back and folded it into the other. I did not raise my voice. I did not list the years of rent checks I had sweated for while a home with my name on it subsidized a lifestyle that did not include me. I only said, "I understand right now." We closed the folder for the night. The bill arrived. Walter signed with a simple flourish that felt less like a signature and more like a line drawn in chalk on a stone floor. Outside, the lake smelled clean, and the air had the kind of chill that wakes you up without slapping you. We stood together for a long minute. The building lights across the water blinked like a slow code. In that blue dark, Walter said, "Tomorrow we start with protection. No noise, no spectacle. We will do this correctly." I nodded. It was not a vow to punish. It was a promise to proceed. Quiet revenge is not the opposite of mercy. It is the refusal to confuse mercy with permission. I went home to my small apartment and sat on the floor, the sealed letter in my lap, like a relic from a ceremony no one let me attend. I did not cry. I made a list. Locks, statements, access. If you are waiting for the moment I break, it does not happen yet. The breaking, when it comes, will not be what you think. We stepped out of the restaurant into air the temperature of a clean blade, and the boardwalk creaked underfoot the way old timber confesses every step. Somewhere to my left, a server dumped ice into a bin, and the sound scattered across Lake Union like broken glass. I had the childish thought that the moon should dim for humiliations, but it kept its bright face, and that made the night feel honest. Stanley thanked the host in a voice that belonged in a courtroom. Jennifer tucked the folder under her arm as if it were something alive that needed warmth. My mother adjusted her bracelet and angled herself toward a reflection in the window. And my father, whose satisfaction could have cut a ribbon, finally delivered the sentence he had been polishing all evening. "Real adults do not need trust funds," he said, crisp as a lecture, casual as gum. "That is why we managed yours." The words hit with no fireworks, just the quiet efficiency of a stamp on paper. For a breath, I forgot how to inhale. Gravel crunched under a valet's shoe. A gull squawked as though surprised by its own voice. A bus sighed and pulled away. When sound returned, it came in layers: clinking glass, low laughter, a bicycle chain clicking, my mother murmuring that I should not make a scene. I did not intend to. I was learning in real time the power of refusing to audition for a part I had never wanted to play. Walter touched my shoulder the way you close a door without slamming it and said, "Breathe." I did. The air tasted like cedar and rain. My father's face shone in the window as if the restaurant were applauding him. "You always resisted structure," he continued, preaching to his reflection. "You are creative, Caitlin, but creativity needs guardrails. We spared you from yourself." Diane aligned herself to his sermon with the reflex of a mirror. "Sweetheart, you are sensitive," she added, stretching the word until it snapped. "Families step in. They talked about me as though I were a ledger, and they were footnotes. I asked the smallest possible question, kept my voice level enough to balance a glass on it. If this is protection, why was I the last to know?" Harold's smile did a small involuntary tremor. The human body is sometimes braver than its owner, and then he looked at Stanley as if law were a set of manners one could outcharm. There is a specific flavor to being condescended to in public. It is not rage. It is a fine powder of shame someone else throws and expects you to cough. I wiped it off by not reacting. Inside the restaurant, a table burst into happy noise for a birthday that was not mine. Walter angled us away from the doorway, and the four of us, Walter, Jennifer, Stanley, me, made a small island of silence just beyond the glow. Stanley almost formally said, "Tomorrow we will act. Tonight we stay quiet." Jennifer said she would send me a short practical list before midnight credit freezes with all 3 bureaus' temporary account holds requests for updated statements and access logs. Each item sounded like a railing in a dark stairwell. I nodded. I kept my face steady. While they arranged rides, I stood a few paces apart and let memory do what it always does at the edge of a cliff, deliver trivial scenes that turn out to be blueprints. When I was small, my father used to steer a grocery cart bigger than me with one hand while outlining my future with the other, as if both needed the same grip. "Independence," he would say, "means doing what makes sense to me." I thought he was joking. Independence to him had always meant proximity to his control. Even that memory felt suddenly fluorescent under the night. Perhaps this is what revelation really is, not a new fact, but a new light on an old room. My phone shivered. A message from Olivia, a photo of the cake on my kitchen counter iced with my name. "Do not let them steal your joy. Come home." A message from my mother arrived an instant later, a different register entirely. Do not overreact. We will explain when you are calmer. I typed nothing. Silence is not weakness. It is a tool. I used it. Walter's car pulled up. He asked if I wanted company tonight. I want a list, I said, and he smiled in the way only truly gentle men do when they see you choosing stillness over spectacle. You will have it, he said. And tomorrow at 8 in the morning we begin. He did not promise justice. He promised process. It was better. Back in my Capitol Hill apartment, I did the unglamorous things that make a future possible. I took off my shoes. I drank water until the glass fogged my hand. I opened my laptop and created a new folder named after the date, then wrote myself an email as if I were writing to a future stranger who needed to trust me what was said, who was present, what the documents contained precisely when the temperature in the room changed. I am telling you this because memory, especially after humiliation, tries to exaggerate some colors and erase others. Facts are the palette I could control. At 11, Jennifer's message arrived, bullet points arranged like shallow breaths, freezes holds, requests a morning call with Detective Ramirez to log the basics with no accusations yet. There was a separate line about the Belltown building manager who would meet us mid-morning with a locksmith. The specificity steadied me more than kindness could have. Before sleeping, I stood at the window and watched the city move in its indifferent rhythm. Someone laughed 3 floors below. A siren stitched a line from the hill down to the lake and disappeared. I thought of the sealed letter still in Stanley's folder and pictured opening it under the bright light of a copy room, reading the simple sentences that were supposed to have reached me 2 years earlier. I thought of my father's line, "Real adults do not need trust funds," and understood its true meaning. He did not want me to be an adult at all. He wanted me to be a dependent with a vocabulary. The sky was still the same nocturne blue it had been the night before all this, which felt like a kind of mercy. It meant the world did not tilt just because my story did. I crawled into bed and did not cry. I made one more list in my head: keys, codes, statements, access. I promised myself to keep my voice level even when my blood climbed, to write down every date and minute, to let the paper carry what my face would not. Quiet revenge is not about winning arguments. It is about removing oxygen from the fire. In the morning, we would begin closing vents one by one. I did not know yet about the plane tickets purchased 3 days ago, or the homeowners association letters that would read like satire, or the little boat bobbing like a prop in a crime your ego commits before your brain can keep up. I only knew that when dawn scratched at the blinds, I would be ready to meet it with steadiness, not noise. Morning has a sound in Seattle that I have always loved: gulls heckling the water buses, sighing awake, and rain considering its options against the glass. At 8 in the morning, exactly when Walter promised, my phone lit with a conference call. Jennifer's voice was precise and calm. Stanley's tone carried that unhurried certainty only people with strong cases possess. Detective Ramirez joined with the measured cadence of someone who has heard every kind of story and knows the difference between anger and evidence. We started with what Walter called the first circle of safety: credit freezes, account holds, and access logs. No speeches, no accusations, only actions that close doors gently and lock them from the inside. Jennifer walked me through the freezes with all 3 major bureaus: Experian first, then Equifax, then TransUnion. Each one required careful identity questions, answered in full words, never rushed, every letter triple-checked. She had already compiled a packet for me with confirmation numbers rendered as sentences, since she knows I keep records like a second spine. We set alerts for any inquiry that even breathed near my credit. While I spelled my name and birth date and former addresses, I felt something I had not felt in many nights. Not power exactly, not relief either. Alignment. The facts and my actions were finally standing in the same room. From there, Stanley patched in a banker from the trust's custodial institution. His tone did not change when he said the words "temporary hold fraud review" and "limit disbursements to essential expenses only," but I felt the temperature in the call drop a few degrees. He instructed them to send full statements and access histories to a secure portal by late afternoon. He used words like duty and breach and documented notice. Words that make people sit up straight. I did not add anything. My job was to listen and to write. I dated each step, noted the exact time, and left space for the confirmations we would file. Quiet revenge, I was learning, is not a mood. It is a system. At mid-morning, we drove to Belltown. The building manager, a man named Clark, with the weary competence of a person who has seen everything, met us in the lobby with a locksmith who looked at my old fob the way a surgeon looks at an outdated tool. The concierge recognized Walter instantly and offered us water in glasses that tried too hard. Jennifer presented the title packet with my name printed in clean serif letters. Clark compared signatures and nodded. Within minutes, the locksmith reprogrammed the entire access profile for the unit. Old fobs went dead. New ones breathed to life. We changed the physical lock on the front door and the lock on the storage closet because no lock should be left out of a storm. Only 2 keys existed when we were finished, and I slid one onto a plain key ring that did not seek attention. Walter held the other for safekeeping at my request, a redundancy I could trust. In the elevator, as we rose to the corner unit that had been mine on paper for 2 years and a little more, I felt an odd mixture of grief and relief. Grief for the small version of me who believed that adulthood was a staircase you climb only by effort, who did not know that sometimes there is an elevator with your name on it that someone else keeps pressing for themselves. Relief that I was here now, hearing the soft mechanical hum under my feet, watching floor numbers slide by in deliberate order. The door opened to a view that should have made me cry. It did not. The rooms were immaculate in that impersonal way furnished places learn from hotel lobbies. A faint citrus cleaner drifted from the kitchen. On the counter, a note from housekeeping with a date 2 days earlier confirmed a detail I tucked into my notes. The unit had been in use very recently. Clark handed me a small stack of mail addressed to a management company I did not recognize, and Stanley's eyebrows lifted just enough to count as a comment. We conducted a simple inventory. Nothing felt personal because nothing was. A set of neutral dishes, a linen throw a plant that had learned how to live without kindness by leaning toward the light. I opened the balcony door and let the lake air in. The city looked back without apology. Clark promised to send the last 12 months of guest logs and delivery records by evening. He did not ask questions he did not need to know the answers to, but as he left, he said in a voice that knew the weight of experience that families can be the best neighbors and the worst landlords. I thanked him and locked the door behind him with my new key, listening to the clean mechanical click that sounded like a sentence ending with conviction. Back at Walter's office, the second circle of safety began. Forensic accounting is not cinematic, and that is why it works. Jennifer and a specialist named Evan, who looked like the human embodiment of a spreadsheet that cares, began constructing a timeline from statements, emails, and access logs. Every withdrawal was paired with a document. Every document was tagged with a date and a person. When you line up facts in rows and columns, a story appears whether you want it to or not. There it was, rental checks from my Belltown unit, routed through a company held by my father, then forwarded to cover payments on a house in Florida that had never been disclosed to me. There it was, jewelry purchases itemized as family gifts with no recipients listed except a vague initial that matched my mother's first name. There it was, a notation for airline tickets purchased 3 days before my birthday dinner, a one-way itinerary from Seattle to Panama City, departing the following week. The screen did not blink when that line came up. I did not either. I wrote it down. Detective Ramirez listened without interruption as Walter summarized. The detective asked for nothing we did not already have and requested nothing we were not willing to give. He issued what he called a courtesy watch for outgoing international travel associated with the relevant names, not a block, not an accusation, just a note that if certain people tried to step through certain doors, someone would notice. He explained in calm words the difference between protecting assets and punishing people. We all agreed we were not seeking handcuffs. We were seeking boundaries and restitution. He thanked us for being orderly. It was the kind of thanks that recognizes how rare that choice is. Late afternoon slid toward evening. The portal filled with documents that would have taken most people a week to chase. Jennifer kept a whiteboard list in tidy handwriting that made my pulse slow every time I looked at it. Freeze confirmations received, building access reset, statements uploaded, timeline draft complete, press inquiry deflected with a neutral sentence about internal review. In a quieter column, she wrote 3 words and circled them. "Keep breathing, Caitlin." I did as instructed. I drank water. I ate a sandwich. Olivia dropped at the door like a care package with a note that said, "You are not alone even when you choose silence." And for the first time since the dinner that started this, I slept without rehearsing comebacks to lines my parents would never stop delivering. Before I closed my eyes, I copied my notes to a second drive and placed the key from Belltown on my nightstand. I did not feel triumphant. I felt accurate. Quiet revenge done correctly is not a performance. It is the clean arithmetic of closing what should never have been open and opening what should never have been closed. Tomorrow would bring a new layer of proof, some of it surprisingly domestic and almost absurd. A doorbell, for example, has better memory than most people. I will tell you what it remembered soon. By mid-morning the next day, the third circle of safety began, with something almost domestic, a doorbell. Jennifer had already engaged a local property manager in the Florida county where the waterfront house sat, and by 10 in the morning we were on a video call with her in a sunlit kitchen that did not look like mine. She held up the smart lock kit and the slim doorbell camera box like an evidence exhibit, with a notarized letter of authority from the trust and a copy of the title. Corrections in process, she changed the alarm codes, reset the lock, and transferred the camera account to a new email controlled by Walter's office. It took a handful of minutes and a calm voice. Then she opened the archive. The little timeline of colored dots bloomed arrivals, departures, motion voices too close to the door. A house will tell you who thinks they own it if you let it speak. The first clip was dated Friday, June 9th, late evening. Headlights flooded the driveway and my mother's voice floated in hushed and exasperated in the way of people who believe walls owe them privacy. Quickly, she said, "Boxes first." My father's reply was a low command, the tone he reserved for staff, and too often for me. "We are not thieves," he said, which is a sentence no honest person needs to say. They loaded 3 neat containers past the lens. The second clip was dated Sunday, June 11th, just after sunset, the same day airline tickets would later appear in the ledger. "Leave the linens," my mother whispered. "Take the jewelry box, the folder, and the keys for the dock. We are keeping the boat," she said, keeping like a birthright. The audio caught the metallic chime of a keyring and the little rustle of a laugh that did not belong to Joy. A third clip rolled in from Monday, June 12th, mid-afternoon. Not my parents this time. A community manager from the Homeowners Association, cheerful and practiced, pressed the doorbell and announced a compliance reminder about dock usage and guest access. Her clipboard note was brisk, a fine assessed for an unregistered craft parked beyond the authorized hours, with a second larger fine if the violation was not cured within 10 days. Later that hour, an email arrived in the property's account with the same language itemizing an initial penalty of $500 and a further penalty of $1,000 if ignored. Evan, the forensic specialist, read each notice like a metronome, logging the exact times into his growing timeline. I watched my parents' version of stewardship dissolve into footage and fines into dates and decimals that made a story no performance could interrupt. In another clip, just after dusk on Tuesday, June 13th, my father stood on the front step and laughed into his phone, a sound I had always read as confidence and now understood as appetite. "She will never know," he said, and the camera microphone heard him plainly. "We have managed this for years." The sentence slid into the room where we watched like a blade into a sheath. Walter's face did not change. Stanley's pen did not pause. Jennifer simply typed the rhythm of her keys, steady as rain. Quiet revenge was doing its quiet work. We were not inventing malice. We were letting the facts speak in complete sentences. By early afternoon, the property manager had also walked us along the dock with her phone camera narrating the posted rules that any neighbor could see. No unregistered boats left past sunset. No guest fobs shared. No exceptions for people who love to make exceptions. The small boat shining in its slip looked like a postcard and read like a confession. Its registration renewal notice sat in the property email too, unopened, bearing my father's name. An auto-generated reminder from the marina warned that access would be disabled if proof of renewal did not arrive by Friday, June 16th. Evan drew a simple line connecting 3 facts: the violation notices, the unrenewed registration, and the one-way itinerary set for the following week. The picture did not need color commentary. It needed signatures, and those would come. We spent the late afternoon compiling an evidence packet that did not accuse anyone. It merely arranged what had already happened in the order it happened. Stanley drafted a preservation request to the Homeowners Association and to the marina, asking that all relevant footage and entry logs be held for 90 days while title matters were finalized. Detective Ramirez accepted a copy of the index, and in that same dry voice I had come to trust, explained the legal difference between protecting assets and punishing relatives. "You are doing the first," he said. "Stay on that road. If they cross a line, the law is a separate lane." He made a courteous note with the airline and the marina. No drama, just daylight. In the quiet between tasks, Olivia knocked and slid a container of soup onto my kitchen counter, like a friend laying down a truce between the body and the mind. "You look steady," she said. "I am steady," I answered, and was surprised to hear that it was true. We sat for a few minutes without narrating anything. She asked if I had spoken to my parents. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "I am listening to the house talk." She did not ask for the highlights. She does not care for highlights. She cares for outcomes. "Then let the house finish its story," she said, and left me to it. The email portal pinged with one last message before evening a short press inquiry from a local business desk asking for comment on an internal review at Walter's family office. Stanley drafted a line that said nothing and told the truth. A routine audit had identified irregularities in beneficiary communications and corrective steps were underway. We would need to say more later. For now, silence protected more than it concealed. Walter underlined 2 phrases on the whiteboard Jennifer kept: maintain process and stay kind. Kindness in this usage did not mean indulgence. It meant the discipline to keep your own hands clean when someone else has dirtied the room. Night settled on the lake like a closed lid. I watched the Florida clips one last time, then closed the archive and copied the files to 2 separate drives, labeling them with spelled-out dates like a librarian preparing a long history instead of a short fight. I thought about calling my parents and asking them why. Then I remembered the sentence my father loved: "Real adults do not need trust funds." What he meant was simpler and meaner. Real adults do not need boundaries if he can decide where the lines go. Quiet revenge is the refusal to debate with that kind of belief. It is the patient construction of a world where the lines are drawn in ink and the signatures are witnessed. Tomorrow, we would begin presenting choices. I would not raise my voice. I would not perform rage. I would carry the folder, the footage, and the fines into a room where paper has more gravity than pride, and I would let gravity do the rest. Walter's office is all light and order glass that refuses to distort wood that remembers how to be a tree. We sat at a long table that has negotiated more peace than most families manage in a lifetime. Stanley stacked the documents not as a threat, but as a spine for the conversation. Jennifer uncapped a pen and dated the top page in careful script. I kept my hands flat on the table and my breathing even. My parents arrived 10 minutes late, floating on the performance of people who think lateness equals power. My mother settled into her chair with a perfected sigh. My father looked around as if the room had been waiting its whole life to admire him. He glanced at the windows, then at Walter, and did the thing he always does when he senses an audience. He made a confession sound like a favor. "We have kept everything running," he began, voice smooth with the expectation of applause. "Your daughter is creative. We provided structure. The apartment was put to use. The house in Florida is an asset. The boat is a hobby that appreciates family time." He said appreciate the way some men say destiny. My mother added the word sensitive the way some people add salt over everything until nothing else can be tasted. "Caitlin is sensitive about money," she offered, crisp as a diagnosis. We stepped in so she could be free to build her little career. She smiled at me, and I watched the smile stop at her teeth. Walter did not blink. Stanley did not smile. Jennifer did not look up. The silence was a mirror where their words had to hear themselves. Stanley began, and if fairness could speak, it would use his tone. "There are 2 paths," he said, arranging the papers so that each section was visible to every eye. "The first path recognizes the facts. You will sign a transfer of title for the Florida property back to the trust. You will authorize the sale of the small boat and release any claim to future proceeds. You will refund over a clear schedule funds taken from the trust for personal use, including rental income from the Belltown unit. You will acknowledge in writing that all keys and codes to the Belltown unit have been surrendered and that no access will be attempted. You will remove yourselves from any management roles related to Caitlin's assets. We will file a consent agreement that becomes a judgment only if you breach the plan. There will be no press from us and no criminal complaint from us. The second path does not recognize facts. On that path, we pursue criminal remedies, seek a restraining order, and invite the press to review a public filing. You will choose today which path is yours." My father reached for outrage and found only pretense. "You would put your own parents on a payment plan?" He scoffed and then looked to Walter as if to recruit him as an ally in a play where everyone has already learned the ending. Walter folded his hands. "You did this?" he said, not cruelly, not loudly, but with the weight of a cornerstone. My mother shifted to wounded elegance. "Sweetheart families share," she said. "You are overreacting. This is humiliating." The word humiliating floated there, wondering why it sounded so familiar, perhaps because it belonged to me instead. I kept my voice level. "Humiliation is lying to someone about what belongs to them," I said. "This is correction." Stanley slid a thin stack of pages to my parents. Jennifer placed 2 pens beside the stack. My father did not touch the pen. He has always tried to win by refusing to play the game that is actually happening. "We need time," he announced, author of a script in which demands are requests in fancier clothes. "A week." Stanley did not blink. "You have 3 days," he answered, every word a measured brick. "For 3 days, no additional withdrawals, no transfers, no new tenants, no movement of the boat. We monitor. On day 4, if signatures are missing, we move to path 2. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Deadlines do not shout. They tick. The room breathed. Jennifer noted the date and time on the whiteboard. Evan, staged by the door with the stillness of a witness, added a new column to the timeline choices offered. Walter's gaze did not waver. I looked at my parents and saw people searching for a knob to a door that was not in this room anymore. My father said, "You will regret this." My mother said, "You are breaking the family." I said, "I am repairing it." That is the difference between a threat and a boundary. Threats hope to scare you into silence. Boundaries expect you to learn to speak differently. We concluded without a handshake. Stanley gathered the unsigned copies into a folder marked waiting. Jennifer packed the signed preservation letters and the access log authorizations. Walter stood, then stayed very still until my parents had left, as if ensuring the air itself had cleared. When he looked at me again, there was no triumph in his face, only the kind of relief that trusts a process more than it trusts a punchline. "Go home," he said. "Eat. Sleep. Do not answer the calls unless your heart is calm." He did not need to tell me that the calls would come. I felt the first one before the elevator reached the lobby. On the sidewalk, Seattle moved in its ordinary rhythm. A dog decided to love a fire hydrant. A couple decided to argue about whether to turn left. Rain threatened and then reconsidered. I breathed. The missed calls began their count. I watched each ring without letting it enter. Quiet revenge requires the patience to let panic perform without joining the chorus. By nightfall, my mother had written 6 messages with the tone of a queen displaced from her throne. My father had left 3 voicemails that began with reason and ended with insult. I saved them all, then set my phone face down. The deadline had started its drip. We had offered dignity. We had offered a way to repay. We had not offered permission to continue. Tomorrow, the clock would get louder. I would not. Panic has a choreography. It starts with denial's slow dance and ends with a sprint toward doors that will not open. On day 1 of the deadline, my parents performed all the steps. Before breakfast, the marina emailed a notice that the dock access linked to the boat would be disabled by evening without proof of registration renewal. Before lunch, the Homeowners Association added a second fine for ignoring the first. By mid-afternoon, the airline replied to Stanley's preservation request with clockwork courtesy and a note that the one-way itinerary to Panama City, purchased on Sunday, June 11th, had been flagged for additional review at the airport. Not a block, not a thunderclap, a note. In the quiet world of systems, a note is a tripwire that whispers. Their calls multiplied. They called Walter. He did not answer. They called me. I did not answer. They called Natalie, perhaps expecting an ally, and instead found the person who sent me a screenshot of the message she wrote back. "You should sign." She had spent her early 20s comparing her insides to everyone else's outsides, and she recognized the shape of fear disguised as arrogance. Around dinner, she texted me directly, not with gossip, but with a question. "Do you want help cataloging the small stuff they will pretend is nothing? Receipts, serial numbers, jewelry appraisals?" I said, "Yes. Join Jennifer and Evan in the morning." She sent a heart that looked like courage resting. By evening, the press inquiry from the local business desk became a short column with cautious language about beneficiary communications at a prominent family office. There were no names, but in our circles, everyone reads between lines like it is a second language. A client called my mother to reschedule indefinitely a listing appointment for a home that would have looked very nice on her social media. A compliance officer at my father's insurance firm, prompted by nothing more dramatic than routine, and rumors cued an internal review of accounts where the owner's name and the user's behavior had stopped matching. No one accused. They simply watched. Sometimes sunlight is a stronger remedy than sirens. I collected all of this without turning any of it into victory. Quiet revenge is a refusal to celebrate a bruise. It is the discipline to keep moving along the line you drew before the stumble began. Walter called to say that Stanley had sent a reminder of the deadline and a courtesy copy of the repayment plan with amounts written out in plain words and dates that did not hide behind digits. 3 quarterly installments would return the rental income itemized by month, followed by an additional schedule to restore the larger withdrawals, with each payment secured by a lien on non-essential assets, and a clause that turned the agreement into judgment if breached. The house in Florida and the boat would be transferred within 1 week, with a signed affirmation that no side agreements existed. It was math with manners exact without cruelty. Late that night, Jennifer forwarded a string of emails from the building manager at Belltown. A current tenant had asked where to mail the final month's rent. He had been given a new address, the trust's office, not my father's management company. The tenant's reply included a small note of congratulations to me for finally moving into your own place. I read it twice, felt a pulse of grief for the 2 years I had not lived where my name already did, then felt it pass. I wrote him back to thank him for being prompt and to confirm his move-out date. I wished him well. I meant it. My enemy was not a person who paid rent on time. It was a story told without me about a life I was supposed to accept. Day 2 of the deadline taught me something I did not expect. I could be calm while other people unraveled. My mother sent a long message with sentences that wore gowns. She wrote of sacrifice and duty, an image of what people would think and who would call whom back. She never used the word sorry. My father left a shorter message with the efficiency of a blade. He said I was ungrateful that I was throwing away community for the cold comfort of rules that real adults do not need trust funds, that he had tried to spare me hard realities. He did not hear himself confess. He did not notice that rules were the only thing standing between me and a gravity well he had set spinning years ago. I saved both messages and did not reply. Silence can be its own affidavit. On day 3, the deadline's last hours arrived like a tide schedule printed weeks ago. Stanley texted a single line in the morning, signing at 4 in the afternoon, or we file at 4:01. I went for a walk on the ridge above Queen Anne, the neighborhood I had admired for years, without knowing it would one day be the place I would choose for myself. I counted the easy privileges of an ordinary day coffee. Without dread, a bench that did not belong to anyone I had to please, the idea that homes should feel like consent. When I returned, my phone showed what panic looks like near the end of its dance, missed calls stacked like crooked coasters. One last email titled, "Please," and a calendar invite from Stanley that did not plead, did not cajole, did not wonder. It simply said, "Sign." 4 in the afternoon, Walter's office. I clicked accept. The tide kept time. I would too. They arrived at 4 in the afternoon looking smaller, as if panic had taken in their seams. Walter stood to greet them, and then sat without ceremony. Stanley placed the agreement on the table. Jennifer set out 2 pens and a stack of initials tabs, the kind that look like tiny flags choosing their country. I watched my parents find their places. My mother searched for the camera that was not there. My father searched for leverage that was no longer for sale. Stanley began with the facts, not the feelings. "You have chosen path 1, he said. "We will execute it completely. There will be no improvisation." He led them line by line. Transfer of title for the Florida property to the trust to be filed within 5 business days, with recorded documents forwarded to our file and to the county. Authorization for immediate listing and sale of the property, with the net proceeds returning to the trust. Transfer of the boat's title to the trust within 3 business days, and authorization to sell to the first reasonable buyer. Acknowledgement that all keys, codes, and fobs to the Belltown unit had been surrendered, and that any attempt to access would be treated as trespass. Termination of the existing lease with proper notice, and a clean handover to the trust for final month rent and deposit accounting. Repayment schedule for rental income routed through my father's company spread across 4 quarterly payments, beginning 30 days from today, with a consent to judgment in escrow that would be filed only in case of breach. Larger withdrawals labeled family support to be repaid over 8 quarters, secured by a lien on non-essential assets, including a collection of jewelry itemized in an attached schedule and a second car that the paperwork called luxury without irony. The pen moved. My mother signed with a hard flourish. My father pressed too deeply, the way people sign when they think pressure can make ink rewrite meaning. Jennifer rotated pages with a grace I have come to love, efficient calm, without the need to narrate. Walter initialed the trustee acknowledgement lines and placed his signature with the finality of a gate closing on a pasture that had been trampled too long. Stanley notarized. Evan logged times. I watched. I did not gloat. When it was my turn to sign the beneficiary acknowledgement that I had received updated copies of every statement, I felt a small click inside me, the sound of a bolt sliding into the correct notch. Not triumph, alignment. There was one moment that punctured the neatness. My father paused over the consent to judgment clause and tried a last speech. "You will regret turning family into a contract," he said. He meant it as condemnation. I heard it as a confession that he had long preferred contract-like control without real contracts. I kept my voice level. "Families survive contracts," I said. "What families do not survive is secrecy that pretends to be love." He stared at me, then at Walter, then signed. My mother blinked fast, a secret spell that has often worked on people who want to rescue her. It did not work here. The state seal pressed into the page did not care about tears. The law is not unkind. It is unmoved. When the last tab had been satisfied, Stanley slid a thin envelope across the table addressed to me in his square handwriting. "From the custodian," he said. "Current total value, confirmation of holds, and the new authorized signers." I slid it into my bag and did not open it. He also placed a photocopy of airline reservation details facing my parents. "We have issued a preservation request," he said. "You may fly anywhere you wish. If you leave the country, we will proceed as agreed. If you violate the agreement, we will file. There will be no calls, only filings." He did not need to add that they would now travel as people who have to plan for consequences, not as people who assume consequences are for other people. We adjourned with no hugs, no artifice. In the hallway, Walter touched my shoulder. "Breathe," he said, as if reminding a diver to surface. I stepped outside into air that smelled like victory had learned humility. Jennifer and Evan returned to the office to begin the feed of executed documents into our archive. Stanley strode toward the elevators with the brisk kindness of a man who makes the world more sturdy for a living. My parents walked to the curb and hailed a car, two people returning to a life that would now require calendars, not schemes. I watched them go and felt not happy exactly, but clean. That night, I opened the envelope. The current total after holds and before sales stood at a number that would not impress internet strangers and would absolutely change my life if guarded well. A little over 1 million, now secured and on its way upward with calm stewardship once the Florida sale closed and the repayments began. I placed the letter beneath the Belltown key on my nightstand. The city outside my window hummed same as ever. I thought again of my father's favorite line about real adults and money, felt the old sting and then felt it fade. Real adults do not need trust funds. Perhaps. Real adults do need truth. And I had it. Execution is not a montage no matter what movies promise. It is paperwork and patience and progress, so incremental you only see it when you draw a line from last month to this one. Over the next weeks, the Florida property moved from sunset photographs to signatures to escrow. The marina sent a cheerful email confirming the small boat sale to a buyer who wrote a note about taking his grandson fishing. The homeowners association fines were deducted from the proceeds with bureaucratic indifference. The trust balance began to breathe. Evan's timeline sprouted green checks beside items that once felt like cliff faces. I met with a financial planner whose first question was not about returns, but about sleep. I told her I wanted the kind that did not wake at 3 a.m. counting exit signs. She nodded and recommended a mix of safe and patient, a boring plan with beautiful math. Boring began to sound like sanctuary. The life I lived day to day shifted by degrees. I accepted an offer from a product team in South Lake Union that saw my portfolio and heard my voice. Walter had only opened the door for the interview. I walked through on my own feet. The new role came with better health benefits, a manager who asked questions instead of making speeches, and a team that cared whether the thing we designed made a stranger's day a touch kinder. I rented the same Capitol Hill apartment for a few more months while the dust settled. Then, with the first Florida proceeds posted and the repayment schedule on paper instead of in wishful air, I bought a small one-bedroom in Queen Anne with a tiny view of water that looked like a secret you can keep. The mortgage payment was calculated in full words on a page, a number that fit inside the life I was building. I hung nothing on the walls for a week just to listen to the new quiet. There were consequences for my parents beyond signatures and schedules. The business column that had once been careful added an update about the Florida sale and the internal review at the insurance firm where my father had been a minor executive. Words like compliance and oversight appeared, the kind of terminology that looks bloodless on the page and lands like a door closing in real life. He kept his job, but his name disappeared from 2 committees and his calendar thinned. My mother's real estate license entered a period of review after a client filed a complaint about undisclosed conflicts. No one came for them with pitchforks. Reputations drain the way bathtubs do, not instantly, not noisily, but with a sound that tells you water is not coming back. I did not cheer. I kept my hands clean. And when friends of theirs tried to recruit me into the theater of sympathy, I declined the role. You chose to know them on the surface, I would say gently. I did not have that option. Olivia remained my anchor. She brought over takeout the night I signed the Queen Anne papers and invented a ritual where we whispered a hope into each room and closed the door to let it stick. 1 hope per room, she insisted, because greed spoils magic. We laughed until we cried, and then cried until we laughed. In therapy, I learned to name the difference between boundaries and walls, between silence that protects and silence that punishes. I practiced sentences in the mirror that did not apologize for existing. I wrote letters to a girl I had been at age 10 who counted coins for a school fundraiser and believed money was a riddle she was not allowed to solve. I told her she was already good at the math that matters, the math of enough. Thomas appeared again slowly, the way morning returns after a hard night without asking whether it is welcome. He texted to ask if I was ready for coffee. That was not a strategy session. I said yes, and meant it. We sat by a window and watched strangers negotiate their days. He did not ask for the highlight reel. He asked if I had eaten. He told me a story about his niece that had nothing to do with lawsuits or signatures, and for 30 minutes the world shrank to a manageable size. We did not declare anything. We simply decided not to declare nothing. There is a grace in letting a thing be exactly as much as it is for now. In quieter moments, I opened the archive and watched 1 or 2 Florida clips, not to torment myself, but to remember the difference between evidence and emotion. The camera's steady eye never raised its voice. It simply recorded. I promised myself to live that way, where I could steady observant, unwilling to pretend. The repayments landed on schedule the first quarter, then the second. Jennifer sent me unobtrusive notes with spelled-out amounts and dates. Evan added another row of green checks. Stanley called only when something required a signature, and he kept his calls short, as if to model respect for the part of my life that was not made of paper. Quiet revenge, I was discovering, ends not with fireworks, but with a calendar that stops making you flinch. 6 months after the night at Lake Union on Thursday, December 14th, we marked what Walter jokingly calls the half-birthday, a family ritual for the years that took more than they gave and still asked you to stand up straight. We did not host a party. We did not perform gratitude. We ate dinner in Walter's kitchen, which smells permanently of lemon oil and courage, and we put a small key ring on the table like a trophy no one had to steal to own. "You did this," he said, sliding the ring toward me, "not because you were owed it, though you were, but because you learned to require the truth." His eyes did not shine. His voice did not wobble. Walter does not gild reality. He tends it. The Belltown unit had been sold by then, its quiet proceeds stacked neatly into the trust, and then into a plan that did not ask me to be brilliant, only to be consistent. The Florida house had closed, the boat had likewise, and a final letter from the Homeowners Association wished the new owners many compliant sunsets. The trust balance, steady as a winter tide, sat a little above $1.2 million after transactions cleared. It was not the internet's idea of triumph. It was a life's idea of enough. Jennifer wrote the figure in plain words in the margin of a memo and underlined it once. "Boring money is the best money," she said, and I laughed so hard I spilled water. Natalie had become an unlikely ally in the months between. She knows how to find glimmers in haystacks. She is not an accountant, but she has the temperament of one when the stakes are family, unsentimental about cute stories, allergic to half-truths. It was Natalie who spotted a duplicate entry deep in the old management company's ledger that led to a quiet refund of several $1,000s and an apology so hedged it could have been a maze. She did not ask for credit. She asked if we could drive out to the coast one Saturday and watch waves hit the same rocks until the rocks looked like they were breathing. We did that. We ate sandwiches that tasted like they had survived weather. On the way back, she told me that envy is a ghost that borrows your voice. I told her that shame is the ghost that borrows your posture. We promised to chase our ghosts out to sea when they wandered back. Thomas came to the half-birthday dinner with a bouquet that looked like a small, intelligent forest. He kissed my cheek and asked Walter what needed fixing the way people who love tools ask each room to introduce itself. After dessert, we stood on the porch and did that awkward dance of two people who remember hurt and want to remember gentleness more. "I will not ask for details you do not want to give," he said. "I will not make you a project. I just want to sit next to you while you do your own work." I told him that quiet sounded like an orchestra compared to the noise I had lived inside. We did not plan a future. We planned next Tuesday. Late that night, I wrote the last letter I owed myself. Not to my parents, to me. I wrote the words I had once wanted them to say and discovered I did not need them from those mouths anymore. I forgave myself for believing people who confused access with intimacy. I recorded a simple boundary I could keep. I would answer only the calls I could answer with my best voice. If my parents called to rage, I would not pick up. If they called to repay on schedule, the trust accountant would answer for me. If they called to apologize, I would listen once, not as a judge or a child, but as a person whose life did not hinge on their weather. I placed the letter in a drawer beside the Belltown key tag I kept as a relic of a past path not walked. Relics are not altars. They are reminders of the map you will not use again. Before sleep, I asked myself if I should have pressed charges. Many of you will ask me the same in the comments, and your answers will be songs you sing from your own histories. Here is mine. I chose a justice that looks like repair. I chose a revenge that looks like order. I chose to let the facts carve their own river without dynamite. It did not feel romantic. It felt adult. And in a quiet way, it humbled me. The point was not to win a war. The point was to stop living in one. Closure is a word people use to sell scented candles and weekend retreats. Real closure, as it arrived in my life, smelled like paper, tasted like water, and looked like a calendar with fewer red circles. The repayments kept arriving, dates turned into checks, checks turned into ledger lines, and ledger lines turned into a trust that did not need adrenaline to stand. My parents stayed in their version of dignity, which is to say they stopped bragging in rooms that no longer echoed the way they liked. My mother kept her license after the review, but lost the habit of posing success against every surface. My father learned the particular silence of meetings where you are present but no longer pivotal. We did not meet for holidays. We sent mail. We kept the agreement. We did not audition for forgiveness we were not ready to give. In my small Queen Anne place, I made a life where mornings did not require armor. I walked to a bus stop and watched the city wake without deciding what it owed me. I wrote code in offices where features mattered more than egos. I called Olivia when recipes failed and Natalie when courage did, and between those two numbers a new kind of family knitted itself together without ceremony. Once a month, Walter asked me to read the statements aloud at his kitchen table, the way he used to ask me to read the funny pages when I was 8. He would nod at the clean lines and say, "Numbers are stories when you respect them." We would drink tea and talk about buildings, not people, because buildings do not pretend to be what they are not. Sometimes on the kind of clear Seattle afternoon that feels like a postcard, I drive by the Belltown Tower and let myself look up at the corner where a life once was and never was. I do not ache. I take inventory of gratitude instead. I am grateful for the doorbell that remembered what people forgot. I am grateful for the homeowners association whose little fines made a big story accountable. I am grateful for Stanley's square handwriting, and Jennifer's precise lists, and Evan's patient spreadsheets, and Walter's steady hand, and Olivia's loud laughter, and Natalie's quiet persistence, and Thomas's gentle questions. I am grateful even for the sentence my father loves, because now it is a mirror I do not have to stand in front of. Real adults, it turns out, do not need permission to insist on truth. If you are listening to this and the ground is shifting under your chair, hold on to the railing that is already in your hands. Write down what happened. Turn numbers into sentences and sentences into choices. Breathe when someone tells you that families share as if sharing were a synonym for seizure. Remember that quiet revenge does not mean a soft heart toward harm. It means a strong heart toward order. Sometimes mercy is letting people pay what they owe instead of letting them owe what they will never pay. I did not put anyone in handcuffs. I put my life in a structure that did not require me to be a spectator to my own losses. On the last page of the last folder in the archive, I wrote a line I want to leave with you now. Gratitude is not a leash. Boundaries are not a betrayal. Love is not a ledger entry, but it respects the ledger. If family greed has blindsided you, tell me the city you live in, and the moment you knew the story needed a new author. Should I have pressed charges? Did I choose right by choosing repair? There is a world of answers in those questions, and I will read them with the same calm I used when I learned to breathe again. I promised you a final twist. It is not spectacular. It is ordinary. The twist is waking up one morning and realizing you built a life that does not need to audition for anyone, not even the ghosts that once owned the room. I am Caitlin, 27, when this began, and more myself now than any age can count. Thank you for listening with the kind of attention that turns a story into a pact. Subscribe if you want the next chapter, maybe the one where my parents see me and Thomas at a grocery store and discover that quiet futures are louder than they look. Or maybe the one where I teach a younger designer how to read a statement like a poem. Either way, I will be here steady as a ledger line, kind as a closing door that no longer slams.